Ilara had always been different. From the moment she could walk, she could hear the whispers of the wolves, not their growls or howls that any human might hear, but their thoughts, the quiet, hidden voices that drifted like smoke in her mind. She could hear the joy of a young wolf chasing the wind, the fear of one trapped in a hunter's snare, and the loneliness of the old wolves mourning a mate lost to time. To some, her gift was a blessing. To others, a curse. And to Ilara, it was everything. She walked along the narrow, winding path through the howling forest, her boots crunching softly on the frost-kissed leaves. The trees towered like ancient sentinels, their branches entwined in dark patterns against the pale moon. Every shadow seemed alive. Every rustle carried a secret. The forest was full of voices, and they spoke only to her. "Careful, Ilara," murmured a young wolf from the underbrush. "The hunters are near. They smell fear." "I know," she whispered back, though her voice was meant for herself. For years, she had been the guardian of the forest's balance, a bridge between human and wolf. Travelers who wandered too far were guided safely out. Predators were warned away from villages. But tonight, something felt different. The forest was restless, whispering warnings she had never heard before. "Something is coming," said the voice of an old silver wolf, his fur like moonlight on stone. "The Alpha King. He returns." Ilara froze. She had heard stories of the Alpha King since she was a child. Legends said he was not like any other wolf. He was enormous, with fur black as midnight and eyes like molten amber. He was fierce, proud, and untouchable, a wolf whose thoughts no one had ever heard, not even the wisest of the forest's elders. Her heart thudded in her chest. She had heard every wolf's mind, every secret they had hidden from the world, but never his. The thought of it both terrified and fascinated her. For the first time, her gift failed. The forest grew darker as she pressed deeper. Mist curled around gnarled roots and ancient stones, and the wind carried a cold, electric scent. Every wolf's voice she had known began to whisper in unease, overlapping in anxious murmurs that made her skin prickle. "Do not go too far," they warned. "He does not welcome strangers." But Ilara's curiosity burned brighter than her fear. She had always longed for something that the whispers alone could not provide. Something real and powerful that could not be known through thoughts. And now, she sensed it, an invisible thread, pulling her toward the heart of the forest. Hours passed as she followed the winding paths, the moon rising high overhead. She climbed over fallen trunks and stepped carefully across a frozen stream. The silence of the forest was heavier here, almost tangible, and for the first time, she felt it. A presence that seemed to watch her, waiting, and then she saw him. The clearing opened beneath the full moon, silver light scattering across the snow. There he stood, enormous and regal. His fur shimmered like dark velvet. His muscles coiled beneath it like steel. But it was his eyes that held her. Amber and fierce, they met hers with a weight that stole her breath. He was more than a wolf. He was a king, a force of nature, silent, yet commanding. Ilara instinctively slowed, her hands trembling. She tried to hear him, to catch even a whisper of his mind. But nothing came, not a single thought. The forest around her seemed to hold its breath. The rustling leaves, the murmuring wolves, the soft fall of snow, all silenced in the presence of this one being. Her gift, which had never failed, could not reach him. And in that silence, she realized something she had never felt before. Vulnerability. Not hers, but his. Beneath the mask of strength, there was a pulse of loneliness she could not touch. A sadness that even the oldest wolves did not understand. "You cannot hear me," a voice finally said, though it was not spoken aloud. It was in her mind, soft and slow, like a river flowing over stone. She startled, realizing it was not her gift speaking, this was him, somehow bridging the impossible gap. I can't, she whispered. I don't know why. He tilted his head, studying her. His gaze was not hostile, but cautious, curious, and then, almost imperceptibly, he lowered his massive head, sniffing the air near her. The energy between them was electric, a tension that made the wolves around her growl in warning. Do you belong here? He asked. Ilara's heart raced. She had never been asked this before. The wolves had always trusted her, and she had always known her place. Yet now, standing before the Alpha King, she felt uncertain. I am of this forest, she said finally. I hear the wolves. I protect them. He studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes unreadable. And then, slowly, he stepped closer, each movement deliberate, as though testing her resolve. The forest seemed to lean in, listening. You are unusual, he said. Not a question, not a judgment, just a statement of fact. Even for one who listens. Ilara shivered. There was power in his presence that she had never felt before. Not just the raw strength of a wolf, but the weight of a history she could not know. A sorrow and pride, intertwined. Her own thoughts fluttered like trapped birds. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to understand him, but the silence between them was almost unbearable. Suddenly, a rustle from the trees snapped them both to attention. Wolves emerged from the shadows, surrounding the clearing. Their eyes glinted, their fur bristled. Yet, they did not attack. Instead, they circled cautiously, murmuring to one another, their voices tense with respect and fear. Leave her be, the Alpha King said, his voice a low, commanding presence that resonated through the clearing. The wolves obeyed instantly, bowing their heads in acknowledgement. Even Ilara's own gift could sense the shift. The weight of his authority was absolute. Her breath caught. No wolf had ever obeyed him so completely. No voice she had ever heard carried such power. And in that moment, she realized the truth. This Alpha King was not like the others. He was a ruler, a being who could not be fully understood, a force that would shape her world in ways she could not yet imagine. The forest seemed to exhale around them, the mist curling in gentle waves. And yet, despite the calm, an unease lingered. Something was coming, something beyond even the Alpha King's control. She could feel it in the tension of the wolves, in the tremor of the earth beneath her boots, in the cold edge of the wind that whispered through the trees. I will watch, she said finally, her voice steady now, though her heart pounded. I will learn. The Alpha King's eyes softened, ever so slightly, though the shadow of his loneliness remained. He stepped back, and for a moment, she thought he might vanish into the darkness. Instead, he lingered, his gaze never leaving hers. You may stay, he said, for now. And with that, he disappeared into the trees, silent and unstoppable, leaving Ilara alone in the moonlit clearing. The wolves around her murmured with curiosity and warning, their voices rising and falling in anxious whispers. Ilara sank to her knees in the snow, her fingers brushing against the icy ground. For the first time in her life, she could not hear the thoughts of one being, and yet she felt more connected, more drawn, than she had ever felt before. Something had shifted in the forest. Something ancient, powerful, and dangerous. And Ilara knew, deep in her bones, that she could not turn back. She had found him, the Alpha King, and for the first time, she could not hear his mind. But she could feel his presence, and that was far more dangerous than anything she had ever faced before. The forest seemed quieter than usual the morning after her first encounter with the Alpha King. The snow had fallen heavier overnight, covering the old paths with a fresh, unbroken blanket. Elara moved carefully, her boots pressing softly against the frozen ground. Every step seemed to echo through the trees, and every shadow seemed to watch her. The wolves that normally greeted her with their thoughts were restless today. Their whispers were full of concern, overlapping in a nervous hum. "He returns to the heart of the forest," they said. "He tests you, human. Tread carefully." Ilara's pulse quickened. She knew the Alpha King's presence would be near. She could feel it, even though her gift could not touch his thoughts. There was a weight in the forest, a quiet tension, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. She followed the soft tracks of the massive wolf, careful not to disturb the snow too much. Each paw print seemed like a silent invitation or a warning. She had learned to trust her instincts in the forest. But this was different. The Alpha King's presence was heavy, impossible to ignore, and yet entirely silent. After hours of careful tracking, she reached a hidden glade that the whispers of the forest had never spoken of. The trees formed a natural barrier, and at its center was a small, frozen pond. Reflections of the moon shimmered on its icy surface, broken by cracks that ran like silver veins. And there he stood, the Alpha King, his fur black as midnight, eyes burning with amber light, surveying the glade as though it belonged to him alone. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the silence stretching between them like a rope ready to snap. The wolves of the forest gathered around the edge of the glade, their forms partially hidden in shadow. Even they, creatures of instinct and loyalty, seemed hesitant. "You have followed me," he said at last, his voice deep and slow, though not spoken aloud. It reverberated in her mind as a feeling, a weight of presence she could somehow sense without hearing. "I had to," Elara replied softly. "I need to understand." He circled the frozen pond, each movement measured, each step precise. His eyes never left hers. "Many have tried to understand me," he said. "Few have succeeded. You are different, but difference is not always welcomed." Elara's chest tightened. She had always known that curiosity could be dangerous, yet she could not turn back, not now. "I do not seek to harm you," she said. "I only want to know why I cannot hear you. Why you are silent to me." His amber eyes flickered briefly, and for the first time, a shadow of something like pain passed across his face. He stopped near the edge of the pond and stared at his reflection. "I am cursed," he said, a low vibration that trembled through the glade like a distant storm. Elara knelt in the snow, her fingers brushing the frost. "Cursed?" she whispered. She had heard of curses before. Old stories, humans told to frighten children. But she had never felt one, never seen one manifest so clearly. "Yes," he said, his gaze locked on hers. "A human family betrayed my ancestors long ago. They sought to enslave my kind, to break the line of my blood. Since that day, my thoughts have been mine alone, unreachable by others. I walk in silence so that the pain does not spread." The words struck her like an arrow. A centuries-old betrayal, a sorrow hidden in shadows, and yet carried forward in him. She could feel it, not in words, but in the heavy presence that surrounded him. And yet, in his silence, there was also strength, a pride that refused to bend. "I do not care for the past," she said gently. "I only know the present. And in the present, I am here. I wish to help, to understand, to be trusted." For a moment, he seemed to consider this. Then he lowered his massive head closer to her, sniffing the air near her hands. The motion was careful, measured, but deliberate. He was testing her resolve, her honesty. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath again, the wolves murmuring quietly in uncertainty. "You are brave," he said finally. Elara's lips curved slightly, despite the chill in the air. Perhaps, but I have never known courage without risk. The Alpha King's eyes softened, not completely, but enough for Elara to sense something almost human in the depths of his gaze. She had heard thousands of thoughts, but nothing had prepared her for this raw, silent connection that needed no words. Over the following days, she returned to the glade. Each visit a test of trust. The Alpha King watched her, sometimes allowing her to approach, other times retreating into the shadows of the trees. Slowly, she began to understand him, not through words, not through thought, but through moments. A tilt of his head, the shift of his stance, the way he moved with the forest like he was part of it. And in those moments, she realized something dangerous. She was beginning to care for him. Not as one cares for a creature to be studied, but as one feels for a soul that mirrors her own loneliness, her own longing. One night, under the full moon, the forest gathered for a ritual she had never witnessed. Wolves from all corners of the howling forest appeared, circling the glade, their eyes glinting in the silver light. They howled together, a chorus of sound that shook the trees and sent ripples across the frozen pond. The Alpha King stepped to the center, his presence commanding silence even as the wolves sang. Elara watched, mesmerized, feeling the power radiating from him like fire. And then, as the ritual reached its peak, a shadow moved at the edge of the trees. Humans. Hunters, their intentions clear and dangerous. They had crossed into the forest, drawn by rumors of a wolf so powerful that he could not be heard. They did not know the danger of what they faced. The Alpha King moved instantly, a blur of black and amber, stepping between Elara and the humans. His stance was protective, his eyes fierce, radiating an authority that made the hunters hesitate. Elara's heart pounded in her chest. She had never seen such raw power, such silent control. And then, something unexpected happened. For a brief, almost impossible moment, she felt a connection, not in words, not in thought, but in feeling an unspoken acknowledgement that they were allies, that they were linked in a bond deeper than understanding. Her hand brushed the snow near his paw, and the warmth that spread through her was unlike anything she had ever known. But just as quickly, he withdrew, his eyes flicking to the shadows beyond the glade. The hunters had fled, unnerved by the power radiating from the Alpha King, but the silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. Elara felt the ache of distance, of unspoken longing. The Alpha King turned to her, his gaze lingering. "You are not like the others," he said. "You are different. Perhaps that is why you have survived this far." Elara nodded, though her chest felt tight. She wanted to speak, to ask him more, but the forest seemed to press in around them, urging caution. She had learned by now that silence was part of his power and part of the test he placed before her. Days passed, each one a careful dance of trust and observation. She learned the signs of his moods, the subtle shifts in his stance, the way he interacted with other wolves. Slowly, she began to see beyond the silence, to understand the depth of the burden he carried. He was not just an alpha. He was a king, a protector, and a creature shaped by centuries of pain and pride. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and painted the forest in shades of gold and crimson, Elara stood at the edge of the glade. The Alpha King approached, moving with a grace that belied his size. He stopped a few feet away, his amber eyes meeting hers. "You wish to know me," he said, not as a question, but as an acknowledgement. "I do," she replied softly. "Even if I cannot hear your thoughts, I want to understand." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two souls connected by silence, by trust, and by a strange, unspoken longing. The wolves around them murmured, sensing the shift in their alpha. Even the trees seemed to lean closer, their branches framing the scene like the pages of an ancient story. And then, a howl pierced the night. Not a warning, Not a call to battle, but a sound full of sorrow and urgency. The Alpha King stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the forest beyond the glade. Alara felt the pull of danger, the stirrings of a new threat. She realized, with a shiver of both fear and excitement, that the journey was far from over. The Alpha King's silence was not the only mystery she would face. The forest, the wolves, and perhaps the human world beyond, held secrets that would test her courage and her heart like never before. She stepped closer, her gaze meeting his. "Whatever comes, I will face it with you," she said. For the first time, he seemed to hesitate, a flicker of uncertainty passing over his amber eyes. Then, he turned toward the trees, moving silently into the shadows. Ilara followed, her heart pounding, knowing that this was only the beginning of a bond that would change both their worlds forever. The forest felt alive in a way Ilara had never known. Moonlight filtered through the thick canopy, casting silver patterns on the snow-dusted ground. Every breath she took was filled with the scent of pine, frost, and something older, an energy that seemed to hum beneath the earth itself. She could feel it in her bones. Tonight, everything would change. The Alpha King moved ahead of her, silent as shadow, his amber eyes scanning the trees for threats. His presence was immense, yet graceful, like a force of nature made flesh. For weeks, Ilara had been learning his ways, reading the subtle cues in his movements, understanding his moods without hearing a single thought. Tonight, she would face the heart of his secret, the curse that had made him unreachable for centuries. "You feel it too," she whispered, though the words were mostly for herself. He stopped, turning his massive head toward her. His gaze was unreadable, a mixture of curiosity and caution. For a moment, she wondered if he truly understood her intentions. Could he sense her loyalty, her growing affection? Or would this night end with him retreating into the silence that had always protected him? "You are brave," he said finally, a low vibration that seemed to ripple through the glade. "And dangerous." Ilara smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But bravery is the only way to reach you." They reached a hidden glade, a place older than any map or human story. At its center was a silvered lake, frozen but shimmering under the full moon. Ancient stones encircled it, etched with runes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The Alpha King paused at the edge, sniffing the air, his posture rigid with anticipation. "This is the place," he said, "the heart of the forest, the place where the curse can be undone or made permanent." Ilara's chest tightened. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the wolves gathering silently at the edges, their eyes reflecting moonlight like shards of glass. She felt their tension, their loyalty to him, their hope that this night would bring change. And somewhere deep within herself, she felt a spark of hope too, the possibility that the silence between her and the Alpha King could finally be bridged. "What must I do?" she asked. He approached, the moonlight catching the sleek black of his fur. For the first time, he allowed her close, though still just beyond reach. "You must trust me," he said. "I will share a part of my past, something no one has known. You will feel it in your soul, not your mind, and only then can the bond be tested." Ilara nodded. Her heart raced with fear and anticipation. She had never known a connection like this, one built not on words, not on thoughts, but on presence and shared feeling. She reached out, placing her hand near his paw, feeling the warmth through the snow. The contact sent a ripple through her, a silent communication that told her everything words could not. He lowered his head, closing the distance slowly, and she felt a pulse of memory, of sorrow and loss. She saw flashes of his ancestors betrayed by humans, of battles fought and lives lost, of a pain carried across generations. She felt it all, the rage, the grief, the unspoken longing, and yet, Through it, she sensed resilience, strength, and a desire to protect what he loved. Ilara drew in a deep breath. "I feel it," she said softly, "and I will help you. Whatever it takes." The Alpha King's amber eyes softened, a flicker of vulnerability passing through them. For centuries, he had been alone, untouched by anyone's understanding. And now, here was a human willing to share his burden, willing to bridge the silence. "Then you must do this willingly," he said. "The ritual requires trust and sacrifice. You will give something of yourself to restore what has been lost." Ilara swallowed, her fingers brushing the ice at the lake's edge. "I will," she said firmly. The Alpha King began the ritual. He circled the lake, moving with precision, his steps aligning with the ancient runes etched into the stones. The wolves around them joined in, howling softly, their voices weaving a song older than the forest. Ilara felt the energy build, felt it thrumming through her, through the earth, through the very air around them. Then, he stopped. He stepped closer, his massive frame towering above her, and touched his paw lightly to hers. The moment was electric. She felt a surge of warmth, a flow of life and memory and emotion. The curse, centuries of silence, began to shift, but it demanded a balance. Ilara's own gift, her connection to every wolf in the forest, had to merge with his pain, her empathy intertwining with his sorrow. It was intense, overwhelming. For a heartbeat, she felt every wolf's thoughts, every memory and fear, merging with the Alpha King's own darkness. The forest seemed to tremble, the wind howling through the trees like a living thing. Ilara gasped, nearly staggering, but he held her with his paw, steady and firm, guiding her through the storm of sensation. "You are stronger than I imagined," he murmured. Though it was not words that reached her, it was a feeling, deep and resonant. Minutes stretched like hours. The ritual demanded everything she had: courage, empathy, trust. And slowly, impossibly, the ice began to crack on the lake, spreading silver fractures that caught the moonlight. The curse, centuries in the making, began to break. Then, silence fell. Ilara looked up, heart pounding, and for the first time, she heard it not with her gift, but in her soul. A whisper of thought, faint and golden, touched her mind. The Alpha King's voice, his thoughts, clear and unguarded. "You trusted me." Her breath caught. She could hear him, not through words, not through his mouth, but through the deep bond of shared understanding. She reached out, placing her hand against his muzzle, feeling his warmth, feeling his pulse. "And I trust you." Tears pricked her eyes. She had never known such connection, such intimacy without words. The Alpha King leaned into her touch, and for a moment, they were not human and wolf, not Alpha and Guardian, but two souls bound by trust, sacrifice, and something deeper: love. The forest seemed to celebrate. Wolves howled in joy. The trees shivered in silver moonlight, and the lake shimmered with light that had not touched its surface for centuries. The curse was broken, yet the bond they had formed was not fragile. It was alive, strong, and enduring. But even as they stood together, hearts aligned, a shadow stirred beyond the glade. The human world had not forgotten the forest, and not all who sought its secrets had good intentions. A distant crack of branches, a movement in the snow, warned Ilara that their trials were far from over. She tightened her grip on the Alpha King's paw. "Whatever comes," she whispered, "we face it together." He met her gaze, amber eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. "Together," he sent back, and the forest seemed to echo the word. The night held a quiet promise, Their bond was forged, unbreakable by silence, by fear, or by darkness. Yet danger lingered, a reminder that love and courage often demanded vigilance. Elara felt a thrill of fear and excitement, knowing that she had found something extraordinary and that the journey of trust and heart had only just begun. As the first light of dawn crept through the trees, she realized something profound. The Alpha King's thoughts were no longer a mystery, but the true challenge living in a world that might not understand them, protecting the forest and each other, was only beginning. She looked at him, her hand still pressed against his paw, and whispered, "We have survived the silence. Now, we must survive the world beyond it." The Alpha King inclined his massive head, a gesture of respect and unity. And together, they stepped forward into the new day. Wolves followed, the forest alive with their presence, yet the shadows beyond reminded them that vigilance was eternal. Their bond was a story of trust, courage, and love, a story that would be told in whispers of wind and howls under the moon for generations to come. And in that forest, under the rising sun, two hearts beat, as one human and alpha, guardian and king, bound forever by the silence that had once separated them, now transformed into a connection stronger than any curse.